and other political prisoners. Night Watchman out.
Stay tuned to WEAC Radio, Washington, D.C.'s only independent radio station. Catch us online at weacradio.com.
They were saying when they think you cannot hear. If you understood what they do, if for you it was so clear. If you knew they shut down the factory in an economic ruse. If you could kiss the cheek of the child in the sweatshop that made your shoes. Every time we went to war to fight our evil foes, they told you we were really fighting for the good of CEOs. If you could feel the hunger of the many, see the riches of the few. If they told it like it is, what if you knew?
You're listening to Clearing the Fog, speaking truth to expose the forces of greed with Margaret Flowers, and my co-host today is Dr. Marcia Coleman Adebayo. Kevin is traveling from New York City this morning. We have an exciting show today.
I want to talk about racism within governmental agencies and within nonprofit institutions and how that affects policy.
Affects minority communities. But first, a little bit of news. Wanted to talk quickly about Syria. As you probably are aware, Israel bombed Syria yesterday. And there's some, in the mainstream media, basically they're saying that the Syrian government used chemical warfare. They used a nerve gas sarin. It now looks like, as many expected, it was not the Syrian government. It was the rebels, which are being backed by the United States and Saudi Arabia, as well as others. Also in the news, Korea, be on the lookout because there's a delegation of organizations around the world who are signing on to a letter from the North Koreans calling for peace in Asia. So we'll get that to you when the final draft is available. And we want to talk about Obama's recent appointments. They all have something in common.
Well, it's interesting because I think, as Kevin mentioned to you in an email this morning, they all seem to be bundlers in a sense. And fundraisers for the campaign. Surprise, surprise, I suppose. And I suppose Charlotte's Mayor Anthony Fox has another distinction because he happens to be the first appointee who's African American that Obama has nominated. And of course what's interesting about that is that African Americans gave President Obama about 99.9% of their votes. And of course, one of the last appointees, and the only one appointee is a black person. So it's interesting how even the crumbs are not falling for the African American community at this point.
And we're going to get into that because you've said that really there have been not that many African Americans involved in the government lately. And what does that mean for people in the community?
Yeah, so one other quick note, I forgot to mention that next week there's a court case going forward in New York, and I will be involved in that. It's a trial because I was arrested with 24 veterans at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial while reading the names of the dead and placing flowers at the memorial because we went past a 10 p.m. curfew, which they only enforce when you're there expressing political speech.
Yeah,
if you're there walking your dog, they don't care.
Right.
So we're pushing the erosion of our First Amendment rights, and many of us have pledged that we will not pay a fine or do community service if they find us guilty. So stay tuned for that.
And I should mention also that I'm going to court in about 6 months. I'm taking the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency back to court again. I'm going to win again for the second time. And I'm going to again prove that EPA and corporations, there's basically one single entity, and that is that EPA is essentially a corporation that operates on behalf of the chemical industry.
That's right. I should actually introduce you because you worked for EPA and liaison to the Nelson Mandela administration between the White House and exposed that Dow Chemical was poisoning the community with vanadium that was being mined.
Right. It was vanadium carbide at the time. Otherwise it morphed into Dow Chemical.
Right. And they've written a book which we can show on the screen called No Fear Reservoirs: Triumph over Corruption and Retaliation of the EPA. Thank you, Marcia, for joining me today. I'm very excited. Would you like to introduce our first guest?
Our first guest is Lawrence Lucas. And Lawrence retired from the USDA in 1996 after 37 years in public service. He's a staunch civil rights advocate. And he serves as the president of the USDA Coalition of Minority Employees.
Great. Good morning, Lawrence. Are you there?
Good morning. I'm here.
Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for inviting me.
Well, Lawrence, there's just so much to talk about, really, in terms of what's going on with what's going on with black farmers. Why don't you start, however, by just giving our listeners sort of the elevator speech, the 2-second elevator speech, in terms of what happened to black farmers in this country?
Well, what has happened to black farmers in this country is that the government, we came into this century owning approximately 500,000 acres of land. That has been reduced, not by a corporation, but by a government agency, which is the U.S. Department of Agriculture, to depossess, take back the land that was given to blacks years ago. And what has happened is they have lost their land through systemic and planned and orchestrated discrimination by the federal government. And what has happened is, because of that, you had the advent of and events that occurred, which the black farmers spoke up. And in 1999, there was a consent decree with the work of the farmers from around the country coming into Washington and demonstrating and demanding justice, and having a meeting with President Clinton, which brought about the settlement of this case. And as well as a following case, those African Americans who were not contacted were also reimbursed with a recent decree, and that is they were those farmers who were not contacted. So therefore, their case is now being settled. But what people do not understand is that the history of USDA has been long. It's not only affected farmers, but it's also affected internally the government employees and the whistleblowers who have told the truth. Congress after Congress, president after president, and secretary after secretary has not been able to come to grips with this plantation mentality that exists at USDA.
Now, Lawrence, you mentioned something in your preface where you said that the government had given African Americans land, and did the government actually give African Americans land, or did African Americans actually work very hard to buy the land, and then the land was stolen?
What happened at the end of after slavery? Much of the land, the sharecroppers and what have you, and slaves, began to secure land and was given land. And they earned this land because they were sharecroppers. They came out of slavery and worked hard and bought land from many times the slave owners. And we acquired almost a million acres. Now we're down to we owned about 14% of farmland in America then.
The reason why this issue
1%.
Now, the reason why this issue is important in terms of whether we were given land or we work for land, and by the way, I tend to call slave owners terrorists as opposed to slave owners, because I think that that's historically really what they are, what they were. It's because of a recent issue with Breitbart, as you know, in which basically he was saying that black farmers were basically, not, sort of hyping up the racism issue, and that they were actually taking money from American taxpayers in order to line their own pockets. And the New York Times actually, as you know, confirmed what Breitbart said. Would you like to make a comment about that?
Well, what I have to say is that what they did was they are taking a situation and a fair settlement in terms of where we are, but not totally fair, because the Breitbart, what they did in the newspaper article distorted the truth. I would not refute many of the quotes made by the farmers, but I would refute the kind of conclusions that the article came to. But I think most important is that now what you have is, which has not been in the past, because of the black farmers demonstrating in Alabama in this newspaper article, what you have now is a dialogue on race, which is a dialogue that has not been had because the historical civil rights organizations over the past 3-5 years have been silent on this issue of race. And everyone who brought up the issue of race in the past 3 or 4 years was slapped down. And that was to ignore the fact that racism is pervasive in this country and in these federal agencies, and it impact the customers such as minority farmers. Even to this day, minority farmers' cases are not being processed, not being investigated, not being resolved, just like employees. So that's where I take that issue. I think that we can spend so much time on the past. We need to start thinking about what we can do to correct the problems now and in the future in places like EPA, in places like Commerce, in places like the Library of Congress, and especially places like the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
One other question, Margaret.
And then we're going to take a quick break.
And then we'll take a quick break.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand that some farmers did receive payoffs under Pickford, under the Pickford law firm.
Which is the settlement, right.
Under the settlement. But some black farmers did not receive settlements under Pickford. So perhaps you could quickly explain the difference between those two classes of black farmers.
Well, what you have is decisions. But in many cases, we have found, and there's an independent black farm group that I appeared on radio with this past Saturday and have marched with them in Birmingham, Alabama, and they are all over the southern region, are saying that they did not get justice. In cases in Track B, which were heavily cases that would be $100,000 or $1 million, out of 182 cases, only I think maybe 8 to 12 of those cases were settled. Mm-hmm. So we have a distorted view of how the settlement has come about, but we also have a distorted view as to who the perpetrators and the causes of it, and it's still continuing at USDA today. They claim at the U.S. Department of Agriculture everything is fair, mm-hmm. but we have a Secretary of Agriculture and we have Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights who is not carrying out the law.
Wow. So let's take a quick break, and the song that we're going to play was actually written for you, Marcia, by Ry Cooder. It's called Kool-Aid.
When I'm near you, I'm nearly poor, and that's new to me. You build me up, then you brought me down secretly. I was for you, body and soul. Now I'm trapped in a deep hole. Kool-Aid, I drank the Kool-Aid.
If you're caught with an ounce of cocaine, the chances are good you're going to go to jail. If it happens repeatedly, you may go to jail for the rest of your life. But evidently, if you launder nearly $1 billion for drug cartels and violate our international sanctions, your company pays a fine and you go home and sleep in your own bed at night. Every single individual associated with this. And I think that's fundamentally wrong.
You're listening to WIAT Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Now get out there and do something.
Friends, David Schuster here, and all of us at WIAC Radio are so proud of our neighbors here in Southeast D.C., especially one of our partners, the Ark. The Ark is at 1901 Mississippi Avenue Southeast. It's the home to some of Washington's best, including the Washington Ballet, the Levine School of Music, Boys and Girls Club, and the Children's Health Project. All provide a number of programs and services Within the very same facility, the Ark is also home to the Ark Theater, the only theater east of the river, which hosts a variety of dance, music, and theatrical shows each year. Almost everything you could want is at the Ark, so stop by and see them. The Ark, 1901 Mississippi Avenue in Southeast. For more information, visit the Ark's website, www.thearkdc.org, or call 202-889-5901. The Ark, part of Southeast DC.
June 27th is National HIV Testing Day.
HIV testing is fast, painless, and often free. I've been tested for HIV.
I've been tested for HIV. Have you? To find an HIV testing center near you, visit greaterthan.org.
Hi, this is Chris Hedges, and when I'm in Washington, I don't want my news filtered through corporate sponsors. I want to hear the truth, which is why I listen to DC's only independent radio station, We Act Radio, 1480 AM, WPWC, Washington's progressive working community. We Act Radio. Do something.
You're listening to Clearing the Fog, speaking truth to expose the forces of greed with Margaret Flowers, and my guest today is Dr. Marsha Coleman Adebayo. We're talking about racism within governmental institutions and NGOs and how that affects policy. And with us right now is Lawrence Lucas. He's the president of the USDA Coalition of Minority Employees. We're talking about black farmers, and as well, Lawrence, you said that the USDA is now starting to have more of a debate about racism. Tom Vilsack, the head of the FDA, USDA, is quoted in the New York Times saying, "We celebrate diversity instead of discriminate against it." Can you tell us if you agree with that quote and what's happening?
Well, I totally disagree. I've been president of the USDA Coalition of Minority Employees for 19 years, and civil rights and human rights violations within the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and still against minority farmers, especially black farmers and women farmers of this country, still exist. So I disagree with the analysis or the statement that they are doing any and all they can to resolve the problem. They're not settling the cases. They are not holding people accountable. I was reading in an article just recently. The only person they've held accountable for civil rights violations, and guess who that was? Shirley Sherrod. She's the only person that I know that's been fired, to my knowledge, for discriminating, and that was wrongfully done. That's the kind of people and individuals in this administration that is governing the lives and conditions of government employees at USDA, as well as overseeing what is supposed to be just and fair treatment of our customers and the farmers of this country.
Lawrence, could you please address the issue of why traditional civil rights groups such as the NAACP, SCLC, and others have not really latched on to the black farmer issue and made it a core part of the agenda of the civil rights movement?
I think since the election of President Obama and this whole past post-civil rights era, we have become lockstep with something that is not true. There is no such thing as post-civil rights era for minorities in this country, and especially black people. As I see it, the organizations that have historically stood up for civil rights in this country has turned a deaf ear to this issue of the black farmers. They've taken a deaf ear to the widespread discrimination that's going on in these federal agencies. They have a deaf ear to all the lack of oversight by the Congress and by the EEOC as another example of not making sure these agencies do what they're supposed to do. and in Title VII and Title VI. These laws, under those laws that were passed, are not being adhered to by this administration officials. That is what we have today, and I think the Black Caucus, and I think that the NAACP should step up and do something about this problem, and cease to remain silent, because we have an administration that is said to be correcting this problem, and the problem has not been corrected. It's ongoing, and you have farmers saying this, and you have employees throughout the federal government and whistleblowers throughout the federal government who can attest to the fact that things are worse now under this administration when it comes to civil rights than in the past, and even under the Bush administration. It was never this bad.
And in fact, if you go to www.usda.gov and you type in the No Fear Act, you can actually see the statistics of exactly what Lawrence is talking about in terms of just how many complaints are being filed by blacks and minorities and whistleblowers. And the numbers are just literally off the chart. I mean, USDA ranks as one of the worst places in the United States government to work. It really is a crime scene.
So it's within the agency, and then what they're doing for the communities outside.
Exactly. So you have basically a civil war going on inside of USDA. And then, of course, you've got, the consequences of that going on outside. And, of course, you have an administrator, secretary at USGA who's,
Monsanto's friend.
Exactly, Monsanto's friend, who's all about GMO, genetically, modified organisms. And so this is someone who basically is, if it's not in the pocket of industry, this is the pocket itself of industry that's causing such havoc on our health. And perhaps that really brings us to another issue, Lawrence, and that what is the value of having black farmers? I mean, what is it that black farmers bring to the table that no other group brings to the table? And I understand that they have a constitutional right to farm. That's not the issue.
No question.
So everyone has a right to farm. But what is
the
it
importance
that
of diversity in farming?
But what is it that black farmers, African farmers, bring to the table that no other farmers do?
Like we seek diversity in so many things in our society. I think what farming and black farmers do lend to this country is that they lend and add to that diversity, but they also add and bring a legacy and an ability to farm the land and be a producer just like white farmers. And I think that what they will do is, as long as you have small farmers existing in this country, not only black farmers but also small farmers in this country, it'll keep the larger farms and the larger farm industry from taking over agriculture and being able to, one day or another, pump up the value. It's an economic advantage, and you don't want to have these large corporations controlling the price of food in this country and how it's grown, and have that to happen. And because if you do, we in 10 to 20 years from now are going to be paying $10 for an apple. So it's the economic aspect that small farmers bring to the table, and their ability to farm in a way that's healthy, as well as they can produce and keep the cost of agriculture at a level that we can afford.
Right. And of course, you can only have farms that use less pesticide on small scale levels. I mean, once you have large scale agriculture, of course, you absolutely have to use pesticides and herbicides. And so that goes to the issue of sustainable agriculture and just a healthier society for all of us. And also I would argue, Lawrence, that black farmers also bring the legacy of African farming to the United States. And that is their techniques that were used in Africa that small black farmers that black farmers on small farms use in this country that are just not duplicated anyplace else in this country. Whether that's dealing with pest control or it's dealing with water resources, there are techniques that black farmers use that should be replicated, I would say, by small white farmers.
Well,
so they
people
bring
could
a lot
learn.
to the table.
Yeah, I mean, it would be great if the small farming community could share the knowledge that they have
Exactly.
and learn from each other.
Exactly.
It strengthens it.
I do agree with you.
Lawrence, there's a in the New York Times article, there's a statement about the stories that black farmers reported, and it's very touching. It says there were heartrending accounts of loan officers who withheld promised money while crops withered, who repossessed their land and sold it to white cronies, who advised them to milk cows for white farmers rather than sow their own crops. Can you comment on that? Is that what you're seeing within the black farming community?
Well, what's happening in the black farm community is primarily because I think the article is true. But I think what you have happening to black farmers, you have the taking of land. You have the taking of a heritage. They say now, based on the statistics, that there's only 1% of farmland that's owned by African Americans today. I think it's important that black farmers are able to survive and economically survive in this country. They add to the economy of their communities. They help to educate a whole group of people, a whole group of blacks and students who are doctors and lawyers today. That should not stop because we have a government that has decided to stop black farming so that they can't economically survive. And I think that's wrong.
Yeah, well, we agree.
Yeah, and obviously this article is suggesting that blacks go back to sharecropping, which is essentially what they're saying.
Yeah.
Is that African American farmers should become sharecroppers again. And it's interesting that that's happening again under the presidency of Barack Obama. So you said earlier, Lawrence, that that long term, I mean, these organizations, these groups need to come together. What do you see long term as sort of the field game for black farmers, and how do people like us who want to support black farmers? What do you want us to do?
Well, I think you need to pay attention to what is happening with an organization called the Independent Black Farmers of this country, a new organization which has taken on the challenge, which is not associated with Pickford 1, not associated with Pickford 2. These are independent black farmers. Sure that farming continues in this country. And what they're doing is they're standing up for justice. They've support from the Alabama NACP, and they've had demonstrations down south about this problem. And I think that the one thing that we need to do is we need to come together as a group. But I think most important is the dialogue that has been in the past. We need to get these organizations, the NACP, the Congressional Black Caucus, and other civil and human rights groups, with the help of the media, to continue to expose the injustice of this country. Right. The civil rights at USDA is an affront to our democracy, and we should be speaking about it. And we should be joining together, as you have, Marsha, as Tanya Ward Jordan has in the past, and we need to see that the Marcia Fudge and Ben Jellison come together and address this issue and continue this dialogue that's been forced on them from the southern region by black farmers.
Right. So where can our listeners get more information on this or follow the work that you're doing?
Well, you can you go to the website, which is www.agcoalition, spelled COALITION.org. They could also call me personally if they have questions about the issues and what's coming up and what is planned for the future. And there is going to be, the farmers do plan to possibly be in Arkansas in June, as well as march and demonstrate in front of the White House. And it's said to be a filibuster for the justice of black farmers in sometime in June, and they're coming in large, and I don't know about how large the numbers are, but you're going to have a significant amount of independent black farmers coming to Washington and demanding from this president to do something about this problem, not only at USDA but in the nation.
That's fantastic. Well, we'll get those dates up on our website so people can look that up on clearingthefogradio.org. And Lawrence, we really appreciate you taking time to talk with us this morning about this issue and all the work that you're doing. We're going to go into this next break with Ella's song. It's a tribute to Ella Baker by Sweet Honey in the Rock.
Believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.
I'm Mayor Bill Ewell. Did you know that 1 in 6 children in our country is obese? Being overweight puts kids at risk for high blood pressure, diabetes, heart disease, and many other diseases. Let's encourage kids in Alexandria to engage in healthy, balanced, and active lifestyles. Reduce their time in front of the TV or computer and get physically active. And we can set an example by being active with them. For more information on preventing childhood obesity, visit usmayors.org/childhood obesity.
Brought to you by the U.S. Conference of Mayors and the American Beverage Association.
Do you have a case of the saggy maggies? Or those uncontrollable bra straps? Oh, how annoying! Well, Braleaf is your solution. As you see, Braleaf is made of elastic, not plastic, and you can adjust its length for narrow to wide bra straps. Wow! With Braleaf, the results speak for themselves, giving you the lift you deserve. So try Braleaf, the premium adjustable bra clip, available now.
This is Kimon Freeman, host of Speak Easy and co-founder of We Act Radio. Suicide is a very serious problem in today's challenging world, whether with our troops abroad or with everyday citizens within our own society. Before you take your life into your own hands, tie a knot at the end of your rope and call the suicide hotline toll-free at 1-855-320-LIFE. That's 1-855-320-LIFE. It may just be the most important call you ever make. You talk, we listen, and together we survive.
It's like a jungle sometimes. It makes me wonder how I keep from going under. It's like a jungle sometimes. It makes me wonder how
I speak from Pennsylvania's death row.
A bright, shiny, highly mechanized hell.
Mumia Abu-Jamal is one of the lost souls of the revolution.
And they're trying to figure out how to shut him down entirely.
They have moved heaven and earth to stop his voice being heard in the United States.
When you talk about groups that are maligned and slurred as terrorists in the major media, they're really small fry. They're retail terrorists. Wholesale terrorists are the United States government.
The whole problem is really the blacks. The key is to devise a system that recognizes this while not appearing to.
On the move, this is Mumia Abu-Jamal.
Hi, I'm Tom Morello. Some call me the Night Watchman. And the case of Mumia Abu-Jamal is at a crucial stage. Please go to freemumia.com to find out more information about how you can help Mumia Abu-Jamal and other political prisoners. Night Watchman out.
Yo, George Dr. Funkenstein Clinton saying you're listening to We Act Radio. They do the dog, y'all.
Until the killing of black men, black mothers' sons is as important as the killing of white men, white mothers' sons. We who believe in freedom cannot rest.
You're listening to Clearing the Fog, speaking truth to expose the forces of greed with Margaret Flowers, and my guest co-host today is Dr. Marsha Coleman Adebayo. She's an EPA whistleblower, and I forgot to mention that you're also director of the, oh my goodness, for the Green Shadow Cabinet and Accountability in the Government, right, for the Green Shadow Cabinet.
Very excited about
right.
that.
We're talking about racism within governmental agencies and non-governmental organizations and how that affects policies and minority communities.
Well, our next guest is Norris McDonald, and Norris is the founder and president of the Center for Environment, Commerce, and Energy, and its research arm, or its NGO arm, African American Environmentalists Association. Norris, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Adebayo.
You're very welcome. And I didn't mention, and this is really what the interview is going to be about, that you're also the author of Norris McDonald, Diary of an Environmentalist. I really enjoyed your book. Let me just start off by saying that. I thought it was a really, really interesting piece. It's available on Amazon.com as an ebook. And Norris starts out the book by saying, "My name is Norris McDonald, and I'm an environmentalist. I was the first black environmentalist to work as a professional in the Washington, D.C. based environmental movement." So why don't we start there, Norris? What did you learn working in the environmental movement in 1979?
Well, the very first thing I learned is that, as you mentioned, there weren't any other black professionals working for any of the other Washington, D.C. based environmental groups. And I found that interesting. So I worked for what is now Friends of the Earth for approximately 6 years, from 1979 to 1985. And once I went off on my own, that was the first thing I decided to do, was set up an environmental group that would directly address environmental issues that are important in the black community.
Now, most people would consider Friends of the Earth to be one of the more liberal organizations within the environmental movement, and yet you report that you found that there was bias in the movement, and that there was certainly a lack of appreciation for African American environmental issues. Perhaps you could go into that a bit.
Well, the general observation is that there weren't any blacks working from a professional standpoint. And the problem with that, to me, is that environmental and energy issues comprise very serious and important areas that should be addressed. And the issues weren't being addressed from a black perspective. That is, they weren't addressing energy and environmental issues from a standpoint that blacks could relate to, and some of the issues were probably actually harmful to the black community. So when you're first in the movement, you try to get along and go along and promote the positions that the groups have, but the more you dig into the issues, you find out that, well, not only are some of the issues not conducive to the black community, but are actually harmful, would be harmful to the black community if implemented.
Well, I'm wondering if you could just be more specific and give us some examples of some policies or directives that could be considered harmful to the black community.
Sure. One would be the environmental movement ethic to use price as a conservation tool. That is, environmentalists would probably love to see $5, $10 a gallon gasoline, because it would force people to drive less. It would force manufacturers to produce much more efficient vehicles, and that's using price as a conservation tool. What we have as a policy, we have a policy against using price as a conservation tool. It's regressive. Right. It hurts. It would hurt the black community in particular. It would damage the general economy in particular by raising the price of everything. But it would really be damaging to blacks already suffering from high unemployment, trying to pay the higher prices not only for gasoline for driving, but the increased cost of everything that a $10 a gallon price for gasoline that would cost.
And did in your work with Friends of the Earth, did you have reason to work with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency? And how did you what kind of relationship did you have as sort of the first black environmentalist in Washington, D.C. in 1979 with this organization, and then their outreach to the federal government?
Well, actually, it was an organization called the Environmental Policy Institute, and it had another arm called the Environmental Policy Center. That group later merged with Friends of the Earth, and that's why I say what is now known as Friends of the Earth. We had all kinds of interactions with all of the federal agencies that address energy and environmental issues, from EPA to the Interior to Agriculture. We found the same sorts of problems, and that goes back to part of your history with EPA. But I guess in particular, what was fascinating to me was that you would have racial problems at places like EPA and in the environmental movement when these communities, these minority communities, were most impacted, disproportionately impacted by environmental problems. So not only would you have to fight the environmental problem out in the communities where the problems exist, but you also had to address racial attitudes within the environmental movement, within the environmental groups, and then within the federal agencies as well. They had their own internal racial problems, which, I guess are epitomized by your experience at EPA. So it's confounding that you have to address and try to solve very intractable environmental injustice problems, and at the same time you would have to address institutional racial problems within the environmental movement and a place like EPA and the problems that they would have. For instance, I was one of the blacks who participated with EPA in the first meetings with EPA on environmental justice, when the grassroots not only challenged the environmental movement groups, but also challenged EPA, which, helped get the Office of Environmental Justice established, that sort of thing. So it was all of these historical things that were happening through the 80s, at a time when the Reagan administration was also being somewhat hostile, to put it kindly, to environmental issues.
Well, let me ask you another question. In terms of, working within the environmental movement, when we talk about racism, we often talk about racism on a number of different levels. There's the structural racism, there's the individual racism, there's the group racism. So as an African American working in the environmental movement in the late 70s, how was your interaction with your colleagues at Friends of the Earth? I mean, one would assume it would have been fine since it's a very liberal organization, but was it? And then how were you effective in terms of getting Friends of the Earth to look at issues that impacted the African American community, or were you ignored, or did you decide just to try to get along and go along?
Well, it was a combination of the two. For instance, I set up the D.C. branch of the American Association of Blacks in Energy there where I was working at the time in the early 80s. From a congressional standpoint, I went out of my way to be an advisor to the Congressional Black Caucus. And they allowed all of that, and I was kind of their outreach arm for that sort of activity. I organized the first energy brain trust for the late former Congressman Mickey Leland, implemented various programs that I think were highlighted. And I don't want to vilify specifically Friends of the Earth here, because all of the groups have their challenges, and they admit to them. So I was able to express myself, but not to the full extent that I wanted to. So I did feel somewhat limited in addressing some of the issues that were plaguing the black community. One of the big issues for me was the amount of money spent by environmental groups. I mean, it amounts to billions of dollars each year, and a small percentage of that money goes to fighting serious environmental issues in African-American communities. Right. So I guess the juxtaposition is the difference between working for a group and then forming the African-American Environmentalist Association so that I could work the issues any way I wanted to. Right. Now, once I made that transition and talking to blacks who have worked at groups, what I found was a pattern of those blacks not being very happy, working in a hostile environment, sometimes getting reports that they had to sign agreements to not talk about their situations after they left. And it was a pattern that every black I met, and not that many worked for the different groups, but most of them that I met always ended up with trouble and problems, and they would come to me with those problems. So what I wanted was an organization that didn't have to be distracted with racial problems institutionally, but that could work to go out and to work directly on the problems and issues.
Right. We have to take a short break, and then we're going to bring in another guest, Rue, who's working in a community, a minority community that's affected down in Houston, Texas. So this song is called "Blowin' by the Wind." It's sung by a very young Joan Baez. Stay with us.
Pretend that he just doesn't see. The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Now get out there and do something.
Open Studio Tour is a premier arts event in the Gateway Arts District, showcasing more than 140 artists. Open Studio Tour occurs Saturday, May 11th from 12 p.m. to 5 p.m. in the Prince George's County Gateway Arts District. Attendees are able to enjoy more than 17 venues, 70 studios, and over 140 artists will be opening their studio doors. This is home to the most innovative and exciting art scenes in the D.C. metro area. The Gateway Arts District brings together professional artists representing almost every visual arts medium. This year's tour features music and live performances and an opening exhibition at the 39th Street Gallery. This event is free and open to the public. For more information, please visit gatewayopenstudios.org. That's gatewayopenstudios.org. This event is funded in part by Maryland Park and Planning and sponsored by Gateway CDC, Landex Companies, and Anacostia Trails. We hope to see you there.
Hi, I'm Patrick Ewing. I'm here giving something back to the community. I went to school here. I lived here in the community. I have an office here on Minnesota Avenue. I always loved D.C., just trying to give something back to the community of Ward 8 in this community or from around the country. We Act Radio, do something.
You're listening to Clearing the Fog, Speaking Truth to Expose the Forces of Greed with Margaret Flowers, and my guest co-host today is Dr. Marsha Coleman Adebayo. We're talking about racism within governmental and non-governmental institutions and how that affects minorities. Our guest right now is Norris McDonald, who's president of the African American Environmentalist Association, and joining us is Rue, who is from the Finger Lakes region of New York. She's an organizer with both Earth First and Shale Shock, a board member of the Texas Environmental Justice Advocacy Services, and a spokesperson for the tar sands blockade. Welcome, Rue.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Hi, this is Marsha. How are you doing?
Hey, Margaret. Hi, Margaret. Hi, Marsha. It's nice to hear from both of you.
Good. Why don't you give us a breakdown of what's happening in Manchester, which I've described as one of the worst environmental disasters in this country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. The community of Manchester sits on the east side of Houston, Texas, right along the Houston Ship Channel, which is the largest mega industrial complex on the earth. This community is also at the terminus of the Keystone XL pipeline, which will be transporting tar sands from Alberta, Canada, down to Houston and Port Arthur, where they will be refined and shipped to mostly overseas markets. So the community of Manchester, in addition to having refineries there that are currently processing tar sands, will be processing the majority of the tar sands that will be coming through the Keystone XL pipeline. There are 2 refineries there. One is a Valero, which has pledged to process over 100,000 barrels of tar sands a day, and also a LyondellBasell, which has just finished a massive upgrade of their facility, which will allow them to process 175,000 barrels of tar sands a day. In addition to tar sands emissions, this community is completely surrounded by other forms of industry, like a car crushing facility, a wastewater treatment facility, a couple of recycling places, they call them. This is just another place where they smash up large materials, and then the particulate matter goes into the air. So this community is completely enclosed by industry, and this is a majority Latino neighborhood.
Right. So this community is what I sort of call a sacrifice zone, right? I mean, this is a community where the government has decided that the people there, really do not have basic human rights in terms of clean air and clean water. But why don't you tell us in your own words the health impact? And Norris, we'll come back to you in a second on this. But why don't you tell us in your own words, Rue, the health impact? What's happening with the health of the community, of the people, particularly the children of this community?
Right. Absolutely. And one thing I do want to say is that we've done a lot of research, and we've found research that proves that a lot of these industries, specifically the Valero and the LyondellBasell, cannot operate within the EPA's federal guidelines. They just can't do it, and they self-report all the time as in violation, and the EPA has done absolutely nothing to correct this. They haven't even fined these corporations. There are over 7 different carcinogenic substances that are omnipresent in the air of Manchester at any given time, and the air monitors will detect that, except for the air monitors have been broken in the community since January. So right now, nobody knows what the quality of the air is in Manchester, but we do know that the people that live there are experiencing extreme side effects from the toxic chemicals in the air. On a regular basis, they're having headaches, sore throats, burning noses, skin rashes, burning eyes, and the children that live in this community, in addition to being sick just from the side effects of the chemicals, are also more prone and at risk to developing leukemia. So the children that live within 2 miles of the Houston Ship Channel, which is where Manchester sits, are 56% more likely to develop leukemia than children that live 10 miles away. So in addition to that, I mean, people there are just breathing these cancer-causing substances 24/7, 365 days a year, and these children are, they don't have a say in this whatsoever, and neither does the community, really. I mean, the community was there before the industry built up around it, and it's very intentional that the industry is building there because they think, that they can build in a place where they can build in low-income communities of color where the broader community won't pay as much of attention or care as much or stand up and speak out about what's going on. So the community is being completely exploited.
So if we can go back for 1 second to Norris. Norris, are you still there?
I am.
So why haven't blacks in the NGO community, the non-governmental community, why haven't they spoken out about Manchester, or why do you think the EPA has not cited these industries in the Manchester area?
I'm not exactly sure. My guess, though, would be lack of resources. There is a environmental justice movement, and there has been since the early 80s. But a problem has been resources to address the vast needs of the various communities all over the country. So that would be my take on that.
And what about the EPA?
Same problem. I mean, you have the Office of Environmental Justice, but they have a limited budget. Not only do they have a limited budget, but as you know, Marsha, they are limited in their capacity legally to actually address environmental injustice issues in communities where they exist.
Well, I'm sorry, but the Office of Environmental Justice is not really operational, is it? I mean, it's basically one of the smallest offices within EPA, maybe 20 people or so. It doesn't really have a budget of any substance. So why hasn't the Department of Air or Department of Office of Water addressed this issue?
I'm sure they address these issues from their legal standpoint, from the standpoint of the Safe Drinking Water Act and the Clean Water Act, but you have problems with the law in terms of mitigating or solving these situations legally, because EPA's hands are kind of tied. They can't go in there and just close an industry down because they are perpetuating an environmental injustice. I mean, there's a long history of this and a long history of litigation.
So what can communities do then in this kind of situation?
Well, we can try to do the best we can in organizing the groups that do exist to get attention on these issues and try to implement solutions from the standpoint that we can. Typically, that boils down to litigation, but as I said, the law is weak. And I'll tell you, that's why for years we've been promoting a national environmental justice law that would give the EPA teeth, that would give the Office of Environmental Justice teeth, so that they could actually go in and solve a problem such as the one you described.
So Rue, what do you think? Why do you think the EPA has not been effective, has not done anything, quite frankly, to avert this environmental disaster in Manchester?
Thus far been allowed to get away with it.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the largest problems is the mainstream environmental movement and these non-governmental organizations, because they are taking industrial capitalism as a given and they promote clean and green energy while they center the movement around property rights and middle-class landowners. And it's a mostly white environmental movement. And when they try to incorporate people of color and indigenous people, what they do is turn them into props and caricatures. Mm-hmm. And this perpetuates both white supremacy and male dominance and mass economic exploitation. And it allows them to ignore fundamental issues and the root causes of what's really going on, which are colonization, imperialism, racism, patriarchy, capitalism, all of that's perpetuating the destruction of natural environments and perpetuating genocidal profiteering. So this is really, I will call out these NGOs as being white supremacist organizations because they are totally focused on white issues. And when I heard Norris say that, money is an issue, well, I live here in the Finger Lakes region, and I've seen some of these big NGOs come here. This is a mostly white communities here. Where I'm living, and I've seen these NGOs come here and pull out their credit cards and whip out their money, and they have plenty of money to use when they're working with college groups, mostly white college groups. Then they have money, but they don't have resources to put up in marginalized communities and indigenous communities, and that is just absolutely ridiculous and disgusting. It's very disturbing. Right. So if they really want to be allies to indigenous folks and communities of color and the most marginalized people, then they really need to focus their attention on frontline communities and on those communities specifically, and not just their attention, but their resources, both material and monetary, and they need to start shifting the conversation and talking about communities like Manchester, because if they are putting the pressure on them, then maybe the EPA will start to take notice as well. But until then, the EPA just has a free pass because it's not being brought to their attention.
Well, it's really kind of a rigged system, because these communities, if their recourse is to sue,
mm-hmm.
they don't have the resources to do that.
Sue, right?
Yeah,
which is very
especially when you're going
expensive.
against these huge corporations.
Right,
Huge
and the reality is that
US
in many
government.
instances, EPA is in bed with a lot of the industries, or they are in bed with the industries that we're talking about today.
Right.
And so it's almost a conflict of interest. I'm not sure if you agree with me on this, Nora, so please speak up. But I think it's almost a conflict of interest for EPA to go after the industries that are basically supporting them.
In our last 60 seconds.
So Rue, and perhaps let's use the last 60 seconds to give Rue and Norris an opportunity to say, Rue, what do you want the community to do? I mean, this is an activist radio station. What is it that we can do to support the people in Manchester? And then, Norris, maybe you could also wrap up, how you see the environmental movement shaping up in the next, say, 5-10 years.
Okay.
Yeah, I would like to see the broader the broader activist community start putting pressure on the EPA, whatever that means to you, phone calls, faxes, emails, and also contacting these local chapters of your NGOs and forcing them to take on an environmental justice framework because it's necessary, and if they don't do it, then this is what this results in. And I'd also like people to visit manchestervoices.wordpress.com to find out more information about the community of Manchester, and also tarzansblockade.org, where folks can make donations if they would like to send donations to organizers in Manchester.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Norris?
Well, I think the thing you can do is what you are doing today, and that is to put publicity on the issue. Corporations and polluters do not like publicity. Now, the problem, again, legally is that, as you know, Marshall, with discrimination cases, you end up having to prove intent to discriminate. That's the problem in the law, so we'll address that. But I think the minimum you can do, especially in a case like Manchester, is to shine the light on the problem. And they hate that, and then hopefully that can lead to some sort of mitigation for the community.
Great.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. We're going to go out with our usual song, We Want by Junkyard Empire. The people organized can build the kind of future we want. This is Margaret Flowers.
And I'm Kevin Zeese. Join us every Monday morning at 11 a.m. for Clearing the Fog.
Speaking truth to expose the forces of greed.
Start the week with your eyes open.
The fog?
The forces of greed that spin news stories for the benefit of the 1%.
Each week we feature guests who are working to expose these truths and offer real solutions to the current crises we face.
Knowledge is power, and with knowledge you will be empowered to act to shift the power to the people.
Monday mornings at 11 a.m. on weactradio.com or 1480 a.m.
Hi, this is Chris Hedges, and when I'm in Washington, I don't want my news filtered through corporate sponsors. I want to hear the truth, which is why I listen to D.C.'s only independent radio station, We Act Radio, 1480 a.m., WPWC, Washington's progressive working community. We Act Radio, do something.
But also physical upgrades of the dangerous factories.
You can hear more of my interview with Ms. Durena on the Radio Labor website. As Industrial was pushing the clothing brands and retailers to improve labor and safety conditions in Bangladesh, the International Labor Organization, the ILO, was also at work. It sent representatives to talk to the Bangladeshi government. The result is an agreement that Bangladesh will present a labor law reform package to its parliament next month. The agreement is aimed at protecting labor union rights and improving occupational health and safety. It also calls for the assessment of all garment factories in the country, plus the hiring of more inspectors. Some labor observers point out, however, that Bangladesh agreed to similar actions after a factory fire killed 112 workers last November, but that agreement has yet to be implemented. In other news, thousands of workers and their supporters demonstrated in the streets of Madrid over the weekend. They were protesting an unemployment rate of 27%, with more than 6 million people out of work. Meanwhile, in Portugal, where the unemployment rate is 18%, the government has announced that it will cut some 30,000 public service jobs. Demonstrations were also held in France. Unemployment in France is now at a 16-year high. In Hong Kong, contract workers at the ports have rejected a new wage offer and will continue their 2-month-long strike. Representatives of the workers say the offer is too little and should have been presented to the unions at the bargaining table, not through the media. And that's it. Now you're up to date with the latest international labor news you can use. Radio Labor's daily newscasts are available on its website,